The much-awaited day has arrived, as Art finally joins the Exiris Academy. Elijah comes to wake him up, but doesn't realize that Sylvie is there as well. He makes a grave mistake, unintentionally disturbing Sylvie's peaceful slumber. In her rage, she targets the only person around, which happens to be Elijah. Art wakes up and calms her down, but not before she scratches up Elijah's face. Art quickly gets ready for their first day and puts on his uniform. There are two types of students at Exiris Academy: battle mages and scholar mages. Art will be attending the school as the scholar mage, while Elijah will be attending as a battle mage. As the name suggests, scholar mages learn about magic theories instead of practicing how to use magic in real combat. This comes as a surprise to Elijah, and he tells Art that he should have taken electives instead of centering his education on theories. However, fighting kids his age doesn't really interest Art. Although scholar mages get looked down upon at the school, that doesn't bother him. Rather than being concerned about Art, Elijah is more worried about the students who will get sent to the medical ward because they look down upon Art. But he shrugs off his worries and promises to be on his best behavior. The two boys come down to have breakfast with the rest of the family. Elijah gets his face healed off the scratch marks, while Alice and Ray argue about who did a better job of raising their son. So all in all, a pretty typical family breakfast. After breakfast, they head out to get on the carriage to go to school. Art says goodbye to Alice while promising to visit as often as he can. He reminds Ellie and Alice to keep the pendants on them at all times. He also tells Ray not to burn down the house while practicing. After a short ride on the carriage, they arrived at Exiris Academy. It's a beautiful, luxurious building, no different from a palace. Art witnesses many students arriving on their bonds. Perhaps he could do the same with Sylvie, but that would be a shock to everyone, to say the least. The students are instructed to form a single file line in front of the white building. This is for the entrance ceremony, which is mandatory for all students. All the students walk in a single line and register themselves at the front desk. This is done by using a magical crystal ball. Art registers himself as a scholar mage candidate with an affinity for earth and wind magic. For some reason, the lady at the front desk is left shocked after hearing Art's magical affinities. This comes as a surprise to him, as he wonders why it is so shocking. She quickly apologizes to him and tells him to go on ahead. Art arrives at the huge auditorium for the entrance ceremony. Despite this fact, it's completely full. Not long after Elijah and Art find their seats, the ceremony begins. Cynthia Goodsky uses her wind magic to suddenly appear out of nowhere. Next, she proceeds to use her sound magic throughout the auditorium. As usual, the use of magic quickly catches Art's interest. Cynthia tells everyone that she doesn't like to speak up, especially in her old age, so she likes to use this little trick. She begins the ceremony by welcoming all the students to their humble academy. She proudly announces that this year they have had the most elf and dwarf students since the founding of the academy. Instead of giving a long and boring speech, she decides to bring out the student council, since they are the very students that will be leading and giving a voice to all the new students. One by one, all the members of the student council come out on the stage. This includes Lilia, and the last person to step out is the student council president herself, who is none other than Tessia Aerolith. She begins her speech with a welcome note for all the new students. Although she is a first-year student, like all of them, she has had the opportunity of being in the academy a year longer. She decides to address the discrimination that scholar mages face in the academy. If mere differences in uniform can divide them, then she worries about where the differences in race will lead them. She tells everyone to cast aside their prejudice that breeds hostility among races. Just like the royal families have come together to form the council, she tells everyone that they should do the same for the future of the continent. She ends her speech with a round of applause from the audience. Sylvie's excitement to see Tessia again catches Elijah's attention. He wonders how Art knows about the changes she has undergone and why it seems to matter to him so much. All Art can do is ignore this weirdo. After the entrance ceremony, Elijah and Art decided to take a walk around the campus. Art continues to ignore Elijah, much to his annoyance. While walking, they come across two students arguing with each other. It's a typical student fight between a noble and a dwarf. The noble named Nicholas Drayle challenges the dwarf named Brosnian Boar to a duel. The dwarf is quick to agree and initiates the duel using the badge on his uniform. Nicholas accepts the challenge by doing the same gesture with his own badge. As soon as the duel starts, a barrier is formed around each student. These badges are actually artifacts that the school distributes among the students. They formed barriers during sanctioned duels within the school. Both students use their magic to summon their weapons. Nicholas summons dual swords while Brosnin summons a huge axe. Elijah is good to cheer on the home team. Art decides to use his own magic to assess both students. Nicholas has a dark red core while Brosnin is a black core augmenter. Bros starts the attack by lunging at Nick using his axe. Nick counterattacks by forming two huge slashes using his earth magic. Art is impressed by his abilities since he was able to conjure earth like that while being an augmenter and having a red core. Bros destroys the earth slashes and continues charging towards Nick. He swings the heavy weapon at Nick. However, with quick reflexes, Nick evades the attack and swiftly moves behind his opponent, launching a counterattack with his dual swords. They seem to be equally matched. Bros once again charges towards Nick to close the distance. Nicholas realizes that this is his opportunity. He stabs the ground with one of his swords and flings the dirt toward his opponent. This momentarily blinds him, giving Nick the perfect opportunity to use his earth magic. He uses a spell called Earth Pillar, which lands and breaks Brosnin's barrier. Breaking your opponent's barrier means that the fight has been won. Bros points out the cowardly way that Nicholas fought, but it doesn't matter since a win is a win. The duel should be over since the barrier is broken, but that's not what Nicholas plans to do. He tries to continue his attack and threatens to break Brosnin's arm. Elijah realizes that this might be his chance to become a hero and boldly steps forward. However, his plans are quickly foiled when Art pretends to spot the student council president, causing Nicholas to become alert and halt his actions. When Nick realizes that was just a prank, he becomes angry and comes over to attack Art. Art tries to de-escalate the situation, telling him that it's not cool to discriminate. This further angers him. He leaves, but not before threatening. This doesn't go over well with Sylvie as she doesn't like anyone threatening her papa, so she decides to get a small revenge by spitting on Nicholas's neck as he walks away. Nicholas becomes furious as he feels insulted by this prank. As he is about to conjure his weapon to attack Art, the fight is stopped by the arrival of the student council. 3 members arrive on the scene, including Lilia, Tessia, and the student council's vice president. A few minutes earlier, these 3 members were walking around the campus and discussing their agenda for the day. However, the only thing on Tessia's mind is how she couldn't find Art during her speech. She starts to wonder if he skipped the ceremony. But that couldn't be because she was informed by Cynthia that he was at the school. She starts imagining different scenarios of how they will meet. She wonders if she should play it cool or perhaps be more friendly. Or maybe he will find her instead. All her thoughts are interrupted by the vice president. As they're walking around, Tessia's sight catches the starting moment of the argument between Nicholas and Art. The vice president quickly recognizes Nicholas from House Drayle. He is one of the most promising students that came in last year, although the vice president doesn't recognize Art from any of the noble houses, so he assumes that he is a commoner. As the argument starts turning into a fight, both Lilia and Tessia quickly get into action. They both realize at once that if they start fighting, Nicholas might end up dead. Tessia quickly steps forward to stop the fight. Nicholas defends himself by telling her that it's all a misunderstanding. He blames Art by telling her that he interrupted the duel. Before Art could start talking, he is interrupted by Lilia as she steps forward to ask him what happened. This comes as a surprise to Tessia, as she didn't know that they already knew each other. Lilia tells her that their fathers work together and they are old friends. Art further adds that they have been living together for a while. Although it is a bit misleading, the thick-headed Art doesn't realize it. The vice president steps forward and demands an explanation from Nicholas. Even if he was interrupted, that doesn't give him the right to pull out his weapon on a student. He defends himself by stating that he just wanted to scare Art and that he would never have harmed him. The vice president decides to be a little lenient and is about to let Nicholas off the hook. However, Tessia is not so forgiving. She points out that threatening someone with a weapon outside a sanctioned deal is a violation of the student ground rules. She dares him to do the same to her while pointing out that the minimum penalty for such an action is a suspension. If he were to touch a single hair on her head, the minimum penalty would be expulsion. Nicholas is left speechless. She once again asks him if he dares to do it. Just by looking at the expression on her face, Nicholas is left terrified. He quickly bowed down to Art and apologizes for his actions. After everyone leaves, she finally gets the opportunity to talk to Art. She asks him why he's getting into a fight on the first day of school. Although she asks this out of concern, it doesn't go over well with Art. He got annoyed at her for making this assumption after just watching the first 5 seconds of the situation. However, she tells him that it doesn't matter who was in the wrong. If the situation had escalated, then he would have had to face repercussions. Art continues the argument while pointing out that he did it to protect a student from harm. Elijah interrupts him and tells him to let it go. However, this further annoys him, and he begins to walk away. He is stopped by the vice president named Clive. Tessia tries to stop him, but he tells her that it's unacceptable for someone of Art's stature to talk to her like that. He even goes as far as to say that his lack of manners is because of his poor upbringing. This is the final straw for him. Art uses his wind magic to launch him into the air. Clive lands on his back, but manages to avoid any significant injuries. The annoyed Art leaves, finally ending this awkward situation. Back at the dormitory, Tessia is angry with herself for screwing everything up. She had been looking forward to meeting Art all this time, and now he is angry at her. She grabbed her pillow and screams into it out of frustration. She doesn't seem to be able to make up her mind about who was wrong. Conflicting thoughts fill her mind. On one hand, she convinces herself that she was merely looking out for Art's well-being. Considering his tendency to get into trouble, she fears he might lose access to the library and training facilities. On the other hand, a sense of guilt creeps in, making her wonder if she had been too harsh with him, questioning the fairness of her actions. After all, he was the one who got threatened with a weapon. Putting all that aside, the real reason for her anger is that she just found out about Lilia. She even starts to blame Cynthia for making her the student council president. If she wasn't in the student council, their encounter could have gone differently. While she continues sulking, Clive comes up to check up on her. He asks her if she knew Art since he talked so casually to her. He even asks her if he should go to the director about this matter. However, she claims that the matter is settled, so it's fine. However, in reality, she knows it's far from okay. Elsewhere, Art and Elijah also began to settle into their rooms. Even Elijah is surprised by Art's reaction earlier. It's not like him to get so worked up. Normally, he would ignore such things and walk off. Yet Art himself doesn't know the answer to this. He wonders if the reason is because it was Tess who said it. As they are unpacking their stuff, they are visited by an unexpected guest. Much to Elijah's shock, this unexpected guest is none other than Cynthia. He quickly bows down and politely welcomes her. Sensing the tension between Art and Cynthia, he excuses himself by telling them that he's going to get drinks. It doesn't take long for her to notice how Sylvie has changed, but that's not the only thing she notices. She is only able to sense Art's wind and earth attributes. She comes to the conclusion that he must be using a seal. This disappoints Cynthia, as she had hoped to flaunt her quadra-elemental protege. Although she is glad that Art opted for Scholar Mage instead of Battle Mage. Art was planning on telling her this when he got the chance to meet her, but he chose not to. This is because he did not want to draw any attention to himself because of Lucas. He didn't want his new enemy to become suspicious of him. Cynthia finds this funny in a way, referring to the brother of Alliance and one of the most influential military houses as a mere enemy. With that being the case, she wonders what kind of monsters his real enemies will be. Putting that aside, Art tells her that he does want her help with something related to his school life. He wants to be able to take the higher-level monotheory classes, especially those related to deviance. This wouldn't be a difficult task for the Academy's director. Cynthia is still surprised as she was under the impression that Art wanted to fit in with everyone else. Art realizes his mistake but remains calm and continues the conversation. Cynthia agrees to do this for him and even offers to give him a pass in the upper-class mage's mock battles. This way he can observe magic being used in real combat. Art is intrigued by this offer, but he soon realizes that there must be a catch. This is around the same time that Elijah arrives with their drinks. He starts yelling at Art for being rude to the director. He is made to feel silly when Cynthia confesses to having an ulterior motive. She explains that the student councils are like the shield of this school. This year she has decided to make a disciplinary committee, the swords that she wants Art to join. The academy is full of young hormonal mages filled with pride. This often leads to problems. The disciplinary committee will be the one responsible for upholding the peace and enforcing the rules on the school grounds. Art wonders if he is fit to join this committee. He is a first-year student and he's not even a battle mage. Cynthia gives a short and satisfying answer. It's her school and therefore her rules. Art decides that it would be too much trouble to join the disciplinary committee and refuses the offer. He tells her that he doesn't need the theory classes and he will just teach himself from the books in the library. Nonetheless, Cynthia came prepared for such a response. She tells him that those books are inaccessible for underclassmen, and even if he was an upperclassman, he would have to reveal that he's a deviant to use those books. This is something that Art does not want to do. Elijah is surprised by the unusual relationship, which does not resemble the relationship between a director and a student at all. Cynthia decides to sweeten the pot. She offers to give Art access to a private training facility. There is one concern that he has, and that's whether Lucas has a spot on the disciplinary committee or not. She assures him that despite House White's insistence on giving Lucas a spot, she declined. This is because she had hoped to give this spot to him. After hearing this, Art finally agrees to become part of the committee. She wastes no time and gives him his new uniform, which he will have to wear as a part of the disciplinary committee. It is revealed that Cynthia had predicted their entire conversation as she tells Art that she already had a uniform tailored for him. This pisses him off as he doesn't like to be so predictable. Before leaving, Cynthia advised Art to make up with Tessia, as it is not a good thing to be mad at your childhood friend. Elijah is left completely amazed as he realizes that Art is friends with Princess Aerolith. While on a walk around the campus, Art apologizes to Elijah for not telling him sooner. Elijah does have a childhood friend of his own in a way, however he decides to skip out on details, which in my opinion is for the best. Despite Art's apology, Elijah just cannot move on from the fact that Art knows so many beautiful girls, Lilia, then Princess Catherine, and now even Princess Tessia. Next, he might as well be flirting with the gods. Art tells him that he didn't flirt with anyone, which makes it even worse. He seems to be getting all the girls without even trying, unlike Elijah, who has been trying a bit too hard. He hypothesizes that maybe Art just oozes out attractive pheromones. As they go to the cafeteria for dinner, Art starts attracting the attention of everyone there. It seems that the rumors about his encounter with Nicholas have already started spreading. He pays them no attention, as he is already used to this kind of treatment by now. Long after they start eating, they are approached by a group of students. They approach Elijah and tell him that he's wasting his time with someone beneath him. The leader introduces himself as Charles Ravenpoop II from the famous House Ravenpoop. He is feeling rather magnanimous today and offers to let Elijah join his group. Instead of taking him seriously, the two boys burst out laughing after hearing the name of his house. They cannot believe that a noble family would be named after bird feces. Angered by their insult, he throws away Elijah's food, so he fires back by telling him that he would never go with someone who blatantly looks down on his best friend. Instead of looking down on scholar mages, they should treat everyone equally, like the student council president said. Charles reminds him that it's something the student council says because it's politically correct and it's for appearances. In reality, there is a huge difference between scholar mages and battle mages. This would normally be true, but that's not the case when it comes to Art. Charles tries to prove his point by attacking Art, but Art easily brushes his attack off using his wind magic. Charles is not ready to accept it and tells himself that it must be a fluke. He goes in for another attack. This time, Elijah steps in front of Art to protect him. Although Art could easily get away with magic, he doesn't want to lead his friend to get attacked. To everyone's surprise, the attack is stopped by a couple of vines. These vines wrap themselves around his body and quickly restrain him. Any normal student would not be capable of using such powerful deviant magic, though Art realizes that it could only be one person. This is confirmed when he sees Tessia leaving the room. Now the question remains what to do with him. If they were to use magic, then they would surely get into trouble. So Art comes up with the perfect plan. Charles starts throwing out his threat, telling them that they will not get away with this when his mother finds out. As he senses pressure coming off from Art, the terror leaves him speechless, and even Elijah becomes concerned. Art starts gathering mana on his right hand. Clearly, he's about to attack him. Yet what unfolds next leaves everyone utterly astonished. With one swing of his hand, Art pulls his pant right down to his ankles, leaving him exposed for everyone to witness. This might even be more cruel than physical injury. Art decides to take his leave after putting Charles' dignity right into the ground. When he goes out of the building, he sees Tessia sitting on a bench. This is exactly what he had hoped for, a chance to talk to her alone. Art thanks her for her help with Charles. Having met after so long, both of them don't know what to say. He tries to break the awkward silence by apologizing for his behavior earlier. Though his apologies met with the headboard, just like the good old times, as Tessia tries to apologize herself. She cannot help but start crying a little bit. But she makes up the excuse that it's because her head's hurting. She leans her head on his shoulder and Art comforts her by patting her. She was worried that Art hated her. He assures her that no matter how many times he gets mad at her, he can never hate her. He once again apologizes for what happened earlier. He knew she was looking out for her, so he shouldn't have lashed out. Their moment is interrupted by Elijah's arrival. He came here to tell them that Ravenpoop has finally managed to get out of the vines. When he witnesses them all snuggled up, the look on his face is enough to tell everyone what he's thinking. He quickly only excuses himself to not interrupt their romantic moment. At least that's what he thinks. Art asks her if she would like to go on a walk with him so they can talk more. He tells her all about his adventures for the past 2 years. Art is surprised to learn that Varian is so close to Cynthia. Tessia reveals that this was the reason why she was able to become Cynthia's disciple. Art assures her that her skills had more to do with it. Now that she has finally gotten to spend some time with him, she begins to notice how much Art has changed in these past couple of years. The way he moves and talks, there's so much purpose behind it. Not to mention, he has become much more good-looking as well. She starts to feel jealous of Jasmine for getting to spend 2 years with him. It starts to get late, so Art suggests going back to their dorms before they get into trouble. Before they leave, Art has a little gift for Tessia. It's the Elderwood Guardian's beast core that he had saved up. Although she had heard about it from Cynthia, she is still surprised. She couldn't be happier to receive such a precious gift from him. When he finally gets back to his room, he's greeted by Elijah's ghost. This ghost was formed probably after he died of jealousy. He immediately wants an explanation for what he witnessed earlier. Even after Art explains everything, Elijah is still in disbelief that Art is friends with the lunar goddess. This is the nickname that the students have bestowed upon her. Her beauty and radiance are like the moon, but Art got to touch the moon and snuggle with the moon. This is the reason for Elijah's anger. Art quickly knocks him out with his pillow and goes to sleep. The long-awaited day has finally dawned, as it's his first official day as a student at Osiris Academy and as a member of the disciplinary committee. Art puts on his new uniform and walks to the club room. This sure catches the attention of all the nearby students who are still unaware of the disciplinary committee. It's finally time for Art to meet the so-called strongest students of Osiris Academy. As soon as he opens the door, a huge lion jumps in front of him and roars with all his might. Sylvie holds on for her dear life to not get blown away. Despite the powerful roar, it fails to get a reaction out of Art. All it manages to do is piss Sylvie off and cover him with drool. This was supposed to be an elaborate welcome prank by one of the senior members of the committee, but it obviously failed. This guy is a 4th year named Kai Cressless. Art returns the polite greeting and introduces himself as well as Sylvie, who is busy taking down the mighty lion. Even Kai is surprised to see this and wonders what sort of a beast she is for her to be able to render Grotter so submissive. Their conversation is interrupted by another member of the committee. She's a tough-looking, brawny 1st year. One look at her and Art is reminded of Helgarth, Elijah's childhood friend. However, thankfully, that's not the case. She introduces herself as Deridria Oregard. She extends a polite hand while introducing herself, but he just slaps it away, clearly showing his macho and tough guy personality. The 3 of them head off to meet the rest of the DC officers who are waiting in the next room. The first person Art notices upon entering the room is Prince Curtis. It's no surprise that a member of the royal family would be part of the committee. Even he is surprised to see his bond Grotter acting so scared. It seems he fell to the mighty Sylvie, who now uses the lion as a personal carriage. Upon seeing Curtis, Art instantly realizes that this world lion is the same one that he purchased at Helstee's auction house. They greet each other like old friends. Curtis is not the only member of the royal family to be on the disciplinary committee. It seems Princess Cathelm is a member as well, which is hardly a surprise. However, the next member is indeed a very big surprise. It's Ferrith Evsar, the same elf that Art met during his time in the Elven Kingdom. Art calls him by his nickname Feifei. This pisses him off, but at the same time gets a laugh out of all the other members of the disciplinary committee. Although Ferrith is a 1st year just like Art, he is still a few years older than him. So Art should treat him with respect, but knowing Art's personality, that's not going to happen. The last 2 members also arrived to introduce themselves. Firstly, it's Claire Bladeheart. Being a 6th year student, she's the most senior member of the committee and also their leader. Art instantly recognizes the name Bladeheart. It's the same last name as Caspian. She confirms that Caspian is her uncle. She asks Art if he knows him. He decides to keep his connection to Caspian a secret and instead tells her that he has heard a lot of great things about him. The last member of the disciplinary committee is Theo. Unlike everyone else, he is not so welcoming. He is not satisfied with the weak and scrawny-looking Art, so he decides to give him a test. As they shake hands, he unleashes his gravity magic on him. Being as strong as he is, Even Art has to use his own magic to counter the full force of Theo's gravity magic. If it wasn't for his assimilation with Sylvie's beast will, even Art wouldn't have been able to withstand it. Theo, as well as all the other members of the disciplinary committee, are impressed that Art is able to withstand gravity magic. This is something that Feifei failed miserably. He tries to defend himself by telling everyone that he is a conjurer and Theo is an augmenter. Before this could go any further, Claire puts an end to their argument. She tells them to stop fighting and put their game face on for the club's announcement. This will be the very first time the DC officers will show their faces to the rest of the students. This is something that Art wasn't aware of, but Curtis tells him that there's nothing to worry about. The student council will be the one making the announcement, and they just have to come onto the stage and look tough. With an A-class Mana Beast on their side, this task shouldn't be very difficult. The announcement starts with Tessia's speech. She tells everyone about the disciplinary committee, stating that these are hand-picked students by the director herself to resolve and prevent disputes among students. They will enforce punishment on the troublemakers for the sake of upholding peace. With a round of applause, the disciplinary committee members all walk onto the stage as a group. Art's student life has started in full swing. It's time for his first class as a student. Because of the club rush announcement, Art has become the subject of all the gossip. As expected, he is not very happy about this. The fact that he's one of the only 8 students wearing a black uniform doesn't really help his cause. The class begins as the professor walks in. Judging from the wand hanging by his waist, he is a conjurer. After putting his books down on the table, he introduces himself to the rest of the class. His name is Professor Avius, and he'll be teaching the class known as the Fundamentals of Mana Theory. The professor is well aware that this class is not very popular among the students. It's obviously because it's all about boring theory without any practical magic use. Before they start covering the syllabus, the teacher decides to address the conjurers are better than augmenters stigma. In the olden days, when achieving an orange core was considered a huge achievement, conjurers had a big advantage over augmenters. Conjurers typically have much more developed mana veins, which are responsible for absorbing mana and transporting it to the core. Meanwhile, augmenters have much more developed mana channels. These are responsible for the distribution of mana from the core to the rest of the body. Since conjurers are more efficient at absorbing mana, it is easier for them to ascend to the next level. This was the reason for their advantage. However, as both types of mages ascend, the differences become less pronounced. Conjurers become more efficient at distributing mana throughout their body, while augmenters gain better remote mana manipulation. The teacher raises a question for the whole class. If 2 mages, 1 conjurer, and 1 augmenter both reach the silver core stage, who would have the advantage? The answer is simple. The mage who has both great mana distribution and manipulation will be the winner. The rest of the lecture continued with some of the conjurer students arguing with the professor's claims. The debate used hypotheticals and previously recorded duels between high-ranking mages. However, in the end, the discussion did seem to leave the students with an open mind. So, all in all, one could say the professor achieved what he had hoped to do. As soon as this class ends, Art immediately heads out for his next class. He says goodbye to Elijah while telling him to save him a seat at lunch. This lecture hall is designed more like the training field at the Adventurers Guild. It's quite obvious that this lecture will be a practical one. Art is quite enjoying his life as a student. He gets to relax and sit around, unlike when he was an adventurer. His peaceful time is interrupted by Princess Catherine. She wants to sit next to him. Being polite, he tells her to go right ahead, yet in reality, he would rather be left alone. It seems that peaceful time is just not in the cards for Art, as even Ferrith wants to sit next to him. The lecture finally begins as the teacher makes his way. As expected, the practical lecture is quite crowded, unlike the previous theory class. It doesn't take long for Art to realize that his new teacher is the same drunk that he met before joining the academy. The class is known as Practical Mana Manipulation, and what better way to learn this other than engaging in physical combat? Keeping in line with his nature, the teacher quickly starts scouting the students for cute girls. When his eyes meet Art, he is instantly able to recognize him as the student who humiliated him. He starts laughing inwardly as he has finally gotten his opportunity to get revenge. He tells the class that it's an honor to teach the newly formed disciplinary committee. Since everyone is wondering what the new DC officers are made of, he gives them an opportunity to volunteer and show their strength. This is an obvious move to humiliate the DC officers in front of everyone. No idiot would fall for this. No idiot except one, I guess. Hearing the teacher's words, Ferrith instantly raises his hand and volunteers. He boasts about how they are handpicked students by the director herself. It's made all too easy for the teacher, who was looking for just this opportunity. Ferrith walks down to the field and introduces himself to the teacher. Judging from the fact that he cannot sense the teacher's mana core level, he realizes that the teacher is much stronger than him. The teacher even decides to give him a handicap. Even though he's an augmenter, he will only use long-range attacks. This also gives him an excuse in case he loses. Both of them activated the barriers using their badges and starts the duel. Ferrith begins with a spell called Flood Domain. This is a high-tier spell that adjusts the territory to be more advantageous to the caster. Art is impressed that Ferrith can use such a spell. He follows it up with a spell called Water Serpent. It summons a huge snake that charges towards his opponent. The teacher finds the level of the spell too easy to counter, effortlessly summoning blue flames on his right hand in preparation for an attack. It becomes evident that the drunk wasn't all talk. The blue flames effortlessly obliterate the serpent and now head directly towards Ferrith. At the last moment, the teacher redirects the spell and it attacks Ferrith's leg. With just one attack, he manages to destroy the barrier and emerge victorious. This is an obvious attempt to boost his ego by purposefully humiliating Ferrith. Ferrith makes his way back to his chair. Art tries to uplift his spirit by telling him that he did a good job. The teacher, on the other hand, is not done humiliating him. He tells the class that Mr. Ivsar should have been able to protect himself against his spell, but clearly he wasn't strong enough. To everyone's surprise, the next one to volunteer is Princess Catherine. She is an ice magic user. She volunteers despite knowing that she would be at a disadvantage against a teacher who is a fire magic user. Both Ferrith and Art become concerned. It would be a big deal if the princess gets injured. As she makes her way down to the training field, the teacher introduces himself and tells her not to hold it against him. With a simple nod, she agrees. She summons her wand and the battle begins. She starts the battle by firing icicle lances. The teacher easily defends himself. He uses his fire magic to melt all the ice lances. She continues her barrage of ice lances. He counterattacks by throwing fireballs toward her. Art instantly recognizes this spell as the same one that Lucas used during the rank examination. Princess Catherine counters the fireballs by blocking them using her ice lances. This breaks the huge ice lances into smaller pieces that could be used as missiles. The teacher once again uses the same spell to throw more fireballs at her. This is where the princess makes a grave error. Instead of defending herself, she goes all out on the attack and uses Ice Tornado. This leaves her completely defenseless against the incoming attack. Ferrith, being a conjurer himself, instantly recognizes the mistake. With no way to stop the spell, the teacher realizes the horrible situation he has created. As the spell makes contact, a huge blast erupts, leaving all the students in utter shock. After the smoke clears, everyone is relieved to see that the princess is safe. It seems that Art managed to get her away from the blast just in time. Instead of admitting to his mistake, he tells Art that his help was unnecessary. He lies and tells everyone that he had complete control of his spell. The lie seemed to have fooled all the less experienced students in the class. He further explains that he was about to cancel the spell just before it made contact. But Art knows that to be a lie. Having witnessed the same spell being used by Lucas, he knows there is no way to cancel the spell after it has been used. Since he has no proof of the teacher's wrongdoing for now, he is unable to do anything. So, the only logical thing is to find proof. He comes up with a plan to force the teacher to screw up against him. If he gets hurt, then he will have clear evidence of the teacher's mistake. To put his plan into action, he decides to switch places with Catherine. Art summons his sword and prepares to face the teacher. Unlike the previous two battles, this time both of the participants are augmenters, so the teacher asks Art what method he would prefer for their fight. Art knows that he is stronger than him, so he tells him that it doesn't matter. Upon the teacher's continued insistence, Art tells him that he should use the method that he's most confident in. Hence, the teacher finally decides to bring out his weapon. It's a sword enhanced by his blue flames. Although the teacher tells him that he would go easy on him, it soon becomes apparent that he has no intention of doing so. He charges at Art with full force. Their epic battle starts as both of their weapons clash. The teacher continues his barrage of attacks without giving Art any chance to rest. However, instead of firing back, Art enhances his body with his mana and continues dodging every one of his attacks. This comes as an annoyance for the teacher as he realizes that Art is looking down on him. He becomes more aggressive and starts attacking more furiously. Art takes another jab at him by pointing out the fact that he's unable to land a single hit on a first-year student. This increases the teacher's frustration even more. Unable to control his anger any longer, he goes all out and uses his most powerful spell, yet Art continues to calmly dodge all his attacks. The students begin to realize that this is no longer a practice battle. Ferrith even considers calling the student council. After dodging his attacks for long enough, Art finally decides to counterattack. With just one lunge, he nearly decapitates the teacher, forcing him to jump back in order to dodge. The teacher finally realizes the trouble he is in. Art uses his powerful attacks as well as his wind magic. Both Ferrith and the princess are shocked by what they're witnessing. Art decides to finally end the battle. He uses his wind magic to create powerful gusts of wind and forces the teacher into a corner. His barrage of wind attacks finally starts to crack the teacher's barrier. He is left helpless, unable to defend himself. The barrage of wind attacks finally manages to break the barrier, resulting in an absolute victory for Art. His victory is met with a round of applause from all the students. Art notices Princess Catherine leaving the class, so he decides to follow her along with Ferrith. Before he can approach her, he is stopped by Ferrith, who congratulates him on his victory. He admits that Art was quite impressive, which is to be expected from his rival. He returns the praise by telling Ferrith that he did quite well himself. If he had known the type of spell that Professor Geist would use, then he would have prepared accordingly. This way he would have surely won. Hearing this, the princess decides to come back to get an assessment of her own performance. Art decides to be blunt and points out her mistake of ignoring her defense to finish the last spell. An awkward silence ensues as both the boys worry about what her reaction would be. She gives him a simple nod and walks away, much to their relief. Without wasting much time, Art decides to head off for his next class. Despite his victory, he doesn't seem very happy. This fact is noticed by Sylvie. The reason for Art's dissatisfaction is that he couldn't finish off the professor quickly using just his wind attribute. This has made him realize that he has to work a lot harder to get better. He finally reaches his next classroom. This lecture will be about the basics of artificing. The classroom is a huge laboratory filled with different kinds of equipment. This might be the first challenging class he has had all day. This is because he didn't study this in his previous life. Art is approached by a nerdy-looking girl. She wants to know if the seat next to him is taken or not. Art politely welcomes her to take the seat. Just like a true nerd, she seems to be an introvert, too shy to even introduce herself properly. She does, however, manage to get a few words out and tells him her name, which is Emily Watskin. The awkwardness continues as she struggles to communicate properly. Art takes the conversational pressure off of her and introduces himself. As they shake hands, Art realizes how rough her hands are. This is an obvious indicator that she's a hard-working student. She quickly apologizes to Art, telling him that her hands must feel gross. Art tells her that it's quite alright since his own hands are the same way. Emily loves artificing and ends up fiddling around with gadgets all day long. This is the reason her hands have become so rough. Art admires this fact about her. In fact, he can't help but feel a little jealous that she has something that she is so passionate about. With fighting, all he is able to do is destroy and kill, but with artificing, Emily has the chance to create new things. She is quite moved by his deep sentiments. It has been quite a while since anyone said anything like this to her, not since she created the projection display artifact. It's the same artifact that was used during the announcement of the new continent. Art is left surprised by how much of a genius Emily is. She also seems to know everything about Art, from the fact that he defeated a professor as well as his fight with Caspian. It is a school after all, where news travels fast and gossip travels even faster. The class finally starts as the professor makes his way in. The professor is none other than Gideon. He goes on and on about all his different inventions. Instead of teaching, it seems like he intends to use this lecture to brag about himself. As the lecture goes on, a mysterious mana beast suddenly starts flying towards the classroom. It enters the class and lands on Art's shoulder. Sylvie instantly puts her guard up, telling Art that this mana beast is dangerous. However, her worries seem to be all for naught. This mana beast is Cynthia's bond. The mana beast landing on Art's shoulder means that the director is calling him. He excuses himself from the class and makes his way to Cynthia's office. As he reaches the office, he sees Princess Kathleen coming out. She slams the door behind her in anger as she leaves. This is obviously a bad sign. Art enters the office and waits nervously to find out what this is all about. He is worried that perhaps he is going to be punished because of his fight with Professor Geist. But since the director tells him that she did not call him in regards to that, instead she has an offer for him. She asks him if he would like to be an interim professor